The morning began like any other at Haven's Edge, the wildlife sanctuary nestled in the heart of the Rocky Mountains. Dr. Eleanor Grant, the sanctuary's lead zoologist, was accustomed to the predictable rhythm of the day, the quiet hum of insects, the distant calls of birds, and the occasional rustle of leaves as animals stirred in the dense forest. Eleanor had spent years working at the reserve, and every creature in its care was as familiar to her as an old friend. This morning, her task was to check on the red foxes, a small family that had recently been reintroduced into the wild after months of rehabilitation. The fox kits had grown into playful adolescents, their sleek auburn coats gleaming as they tumbled around their den. Eleanor crouched low to observe them, scribbling notes in her weathered journal. A faint growl stopped her hand mid-stroke. She froze, her senses sharpening. The sound had come from the tree line just beyond the den. Eleanor scanned the area, her trained eyes catching the slightest movement among the shadows. A moment later, a large figure stepped into view, a mountain lion. Eleanor's breath hitched. The big cat was unmistakable. Aurora, the sanctuary's resident mountain lion, who had often been spotted patrolling the reserve's boundaries. Aurora was a striking creature, her tawny coat marked by a distinctive scar across her left ear, a memento, Eleanor suspected, of a fight for survival in the wild. But something was wrong. Aurora's movements were slow, her body swaying slightly with each step. Her chest rose and fell with visible effort, and a dark streak of crimson stained the fur along her flank. Behind her, two cubs, no larger than house cats, trailed hesitantly, their soft mews barely audible. Eleanor's pulse quickened. A wounded predator, especially one with cubs, was unpredictable. Yet, as the lioness locked eyes with her, Eleanor felt no immediate threat. Aurora's amber gaze, though intense, lacked the hostility Eleanor might have expected. Instead, there was something else, something that stopped Eleanor from retreating. Trust. Slowly, Eleanor lowered herself to the ground, making herself smaller. She kept her gaze soft and her voice calm. "It's okay, girl," she said, her words barely louder than a whisper. "I'm not here to hurt you." Aurora paused, her powerful frame trembling with effort. The growl softened into a deep, labored breath as she surveyed Eleanor with piercing clarity. The cubs, sensing their mother's unease, huddled closer to her legs, their tiny bodies trembling. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours as Eleanor remained still, her hand resting lightly on her thigh. She knew that any sudden movement could trigger Aurora's fight-or-flight instinct. Finally, the lioness took a tentative step forward, then another. When she was only a few yards away, Aurora stopped. She lowered her head, nudging the cubs gently with her nose, as if urging them forward. To Eleanor's astonishment, the cubs obeyed, padding uncertainly toward her. Eleanor's heart ached at the sight. Their tiny forms were scruffy, their coats matted and dull, and their mews carried a note of desperation. Before she could reach out, Aurora's legs buckled beneath her, and she collapsed onto the grass. Eleanor inhaled sharply, her instincts taking over. She pulled out her radio, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "This is Eleanor. I need a stretcher and a medical kit at the South Clearing. We have a wounded mountain lion. Severe injury, possibly internal. And she's brought her cubs." The reply crackled in her earpiece. "Understood. On our way." A delicate approach. Minutes later, Eleanor's team arrived, their movements slow and deliberate to avoid startling the lioness. Aurora remained motionless, her breath shallow but steady. The cubs had retreated to her side, their wide eyes darting between the humans and their mother. Eleanor knelt a few feet away, her voice gentle as she addressed the team. "We need to sedate her to move her safely. Minimal dosage. We can't risk suppressing her breathing any further." One of the veterinary technicians prepared the sedative, while another readied the stretcher. Eleanor continued speaking softly, both to the lioness and to her cubs. Her voice seemed to soothe them. The cubs didn't bolt, and Aurora's body remained relaxed even as the syringe was gently administered. Once the sedative took effect, the team carefully lifted Aurora onto the stretcher and secured her. Eleanor scooped up the cubs, cradling them close to her chest. Their tiny bodies trembled, but they didn't resist her touch. Back at the clinic, Aurora was placed in the large recovery room reserved for apex predators. The team worked quickly to assess her injuries. Eleanor noted the deep gash along her abdomen, likely from a territorial skirmish. The wound had festered, causing infection and significant blood loss. As the veterinary team cleaned and sutured the wound, Eleanor stayed by Aurora's side, speaking softly. "You're going to be okay," she murmured. "We'll take care of you and your little ones." The cubs, now in a temporary enclosure, watched the proceedings with wide, curious eyes. Eleanor could feel their fear, but she also saw the same flicker of trust she had seen in their mother's gaze. Building trust. Over the next few days, Eleanor devoted herself to Aurora and her cubs. Aurora remained under close observation, her recovery slow but steady. She was kept in a secure but open enclosure, allowing her to see her surroundings and her cubs at all times. The cubs, whom Eleanor named Leo and Luna, required round-the-clock care. Eleanor fed them a nutrient-rich formula, mimicking the feeding schedule they would have had in the wild. She used a damp cloth to clean their fur, mimicking a mother's grooming. The cubs, though initially skittish, began to relax in her presence. Aurora's response was remarkable. Despite her weakened state, she watched Eleanor with calm intensity whenever she approached the cubs. There was no growl, no snarl, only a quiet acceptance that left the entire team in awe. "It's like she knows we're helping," one of the veterinary technicians remarked one afternoon as Aurora dozed in her enclosure, her cubs nestled against Eleanor's lap. Eleanor nodded. "Animals are more intuitive than we give them credit for. They can sense intention, and Aurora trusts us because we've shown her we mean no harm." The bond between human and predator deepened with each passing day. As Aurora regained her strength, she began interacting more with her cubs, occasionally grooming them through the enclosure's barrier. Yet, even as her energy returned, she remained uncharacteristically calm around Eleanor and the staff, as though acknowledging their role in her survival. The staff at Haven's Edge marveled at the unprecedented connection. Never before had a predator of Aurora's stature demonstrated such trust, especially while vulnerable. But Eleanor knew this was just a beginning. The trust Aurora had shown was rippling outward, affecting not just her cubs but the entire sanctuary. The stage was set for something extraordinary. Aurora's recovery marked the beginning of something extraordinary. The trust she had placed in Eleanor and her team became the foundation for a relationship that was more profound than anyone at Haven's Edge could have anticipated. While Aurora slowly regained her strength, her cubs, Leo and Luna, continued to thrive under Eleanor's care. Eleanor spent hours each day with the cubs, ensuring they received proper nutrition, exercise, and the emotional comfort they needed. She knew the importance of balancing human interaction with fostering their natural instincts. Leo and Luna were curious and playful, often tumbling over each other in fits of energy, but their attachment to Eleanor was undeniable. The bond between Eleanor and Aurora was equally compelling. Aurora, though still separated from her cubs by a mesh barrier for safety during her recovery, would watch Eleanor with a quiet intensity. Every interaction Eleanor had with the cubs seemed to reassure the lioness that her young ones were safe. This silent understanding between human and predator became the talk of the sanctuary. "Have you ever seen anything like it?" one of the veterinary technicians asked one afternoon as Aurora, now able to stand and walk more steadily, approached the barrier and lay down, her massive paws stretching toward the cubs. "Never," Eleanor replied, her voice tinged with awe. "It's not just tolerance, this is trust. She knows we're here to help." Ripples of trust. Word of Aurora's unique behavior spread through the sanctuary and beyond. Local news outlets picked up the story, and soon Visitors and wildlife enthusiasts from around the region were eager to learn more about the remarkable bond forming at Haven's Edge. But the most surprising development was the effect Aurora's trust had on the other animals in the sanctuary. Over time, behaviors began to shift. It started with a wolf pack that had been rehabilitated at the sanctuary months earlier. The alpha female, a sleek, silver-coated wolf named Luna, coincidentally sharing a name with Aurora's cub, approached the sanctuary's boundary one morning, her gait uneven. Behind her, a young pup limped, favoring its back leg. Eleanor and her team, alerted by the security cameras, approached cautiously. Luna didn't flee. Instead, she stood her ground, her golden eyes locked on Eleanor. The pup, though nervous, stayed close to its mother. Eleanor knelt a few yards away, mirroring the non-threatening posture she had used with Aurora. "What's wrong, girl?" she asked softly. Luna shifted her weight, revealing the pup's swollen paw. It had likely been caught in a trap before the wolves returned to the sanctuary. With deliberate care, Eleanor and her team sedated the pup and treated its injury. Luna remained nearby, her ears pricked forward, watching their every move. Once the pup was bandaged and awake, the team released it back to its mother. To their astonishment, Luna lingered for a moment before nudging the pup forward. She gazed at Eleanor, her eyes full of something that could only be described as gratitude, before leading her pack back into the forest. A chain reaction. The wolf pack's interaction with Eleanor was just the beginning. Over the next few weeks, similar incidents occurred. A black bear appeared near the sanctuary's perimeter, limping from a paw injury. A bald eagle with a damaged wing landed near the rehabilitation center, seemingly waiting for help. A timid bobcat brought her 2 kittens to drink from the reserve's man-made waterhole, unbothered by the humans nearby. Eleanor and her team were astounded. It was as if the animals had collectively decided to place their faith in the sanctuary. Predators that had once been elusive and wary were now seeking assistance. Their behavior a stark contrast to the instinctive caution typically exhibited in the wild. Eleanor theorized that Aurora's actions had set a precedent. Animals are observant, she explained during a staff meeting. They watch, they learn, and they communicate in ways we're only beginning to understand. Aurora's trust in us might have signaled to the other animals that we're allies, not threats. Her theory was supported by the sanctuary's network of motion-activated cameras. Footage showed predators watching from a distance as the staff worked, their presence often unnoticed until reviewed later. These observations, combined with the increasing number of direct interactions, formed a compelling pattern, a scientific breakthrough. Eleanor decided to document the phenomenon in detail, compiling data on each interaction and analyzing the behavioral shifts. She published her findings in a peer-reviewed journal, coining the term transferred trust phenomenon to describe how one species' trust in humans appeared to influence others in the ecosystem. The paper garnered international attention, sparking debates and discussions among zoologists, ethologists, and conservationists. Could this phenomenon be replicated in other sanctuaries? Was it unique to Haven's Edge, or was it a universal principle of animal behavior? Eleanor was careful to temper expectations. This isn't a magic solution to human-wildlife conflict, she told reporters during an interview. It's a relationship built on respect and consistency. Trust takes time and it's fragile. But if we nurture it, the results can be transformative. A personal connection. Despite the global attention, Eleanor remained focused on her daily work at the sanctuary. Aurora's recovery progressed steadily, and soon the day came when the lioness could reunite with her cubs without barriers. The moment was emotional. Eleanor opened the enclosure gate, stepping back to give Aurora space. The lioness approached her cubs slowly, her powerful body moving with grace despite the scars of her ordeal. Leo and Luna bounded toward their mother, their playful yips echoing through the enclosure. Aurora nuzzled them, her deep purr resonating like a low rumble. She then turned her gaze to Eleanor, standing a few feet away. For a heartbeat, predator and human locked eyes, and in that moment, Eleanor felt an overwhelming sense of connection. "You're welcome," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of the cub's playful growls. The impact grows. Aurora's story and the sanctuary's work inspired a wave of support. Donations poured in, allowing Haven's Edge to expand its facilities and establish outreach programs to educate communities about coexistence with wildlife. Eleanor also began collaborating with conservationists worldwide, sharing the techniques and principles that had fostered trust at Haven's Edge. From remote African savannas to dense Amazonian rainforests, the sanctuary's methods found new applications, helping to bridge the gap between humans and the animals they shared their environments with. Yet for Eleanor, the most rewarding moments remained personal. Every time Aurora lay in the sun with her cubs, every time a wolf howled in the distance after being treated, every time a new animal approached the sanctuary's boundaries seeking help, it reaffirmed the profound connection between humans and the natural world. As the seasons turned, Haven's Edge transformed from a simple sanctuary into a symbol of hope, a place where trust transcended fear, and where the wildest of hearts could find solace in the care of human hands. Months after Aurora's full recovery and her reunion with Leo and Luna, Haven's Edge faced a challenge that would test everything Eleanor and her team had built. It started with the distant haze of smoke on the horizon, barely noticeable against the backdrop of the Rockies. By midday, the sky darkened and the acrid smell of burning wood permeated the air. A wildfire, fueled by dry conditions and strong winds, had erupted in the mountains bordering the sanctuary. Though the flames were miles away, they were advancing rapidly, threatening not only the sanctuary, but also the diverse wildlife that called it home. Eleanor and her team sprang into action, activating the sanctuary's emergency protocols. They prioritized the evacuation of vulnerable animals, injured residents, orphaned younglings, and species unable to escape the blaze on their own. The sanctuary buzzed with activity as rangers guided animals into transport crates and loaded them onto trucks. Eleanor coordinated the efforts, her calm demeanor masking the tension she felt. The smoke grew thicker, and the once distant crackle of fire began to echo through the valley. Amid the chaos, a haunting sound reached Eleanor's ears, a howl, long and mournful, rising above the din. She froze, recognizing the call. It was Orion, the alpha wolf of a nearby pack. A plea for help. Orion was a formidable presence in the region, a large gray wolf with a coat that shimmered like silver in the sunlight. His pack rarely ventured close to the sanctuary, but Eleanor had observed them from a distance for years. Now, his howl was a desperate plea. Eleanor grabbed a radio. "I'm heading north toward the stream," she said, her voice firm. "Orion's pack is in trouble." One of the rangers protested. "It's too dangerous, Eleanor. The fire's moving fast and the wind's unpredictable." Eleanor shook her head. "If Orion's howling, it means they're trapped. We can't ignore them." With a fire extinguisher slung over her shoulder and a GPS tracker clipped to her belt, she headed toward the sound. 2 rangers accompanied her, carrying tranquilizer darts and medical supplies. The group moved quickly, their path lit by the eerie orange glow of the encroaching flames. The heat was oppressive, and ash rained down like snowflakes. After 20 tense minutes, they reached the stream, a narrow ribbon of water that cut through the forest. There, huddled on the bank, was Orion's pack. The alpha stood at the front, his powerful frame taut with tension. Behind him, the pack clustered together, their eyes glowing in the smoky haze. Eleanor counted 7 wolves in total, including a young pup with a singed tail. The problem was clear. The fire had surrounded the area, cutting off their escape routes. A leap of faith. Eleanor approached slowly, her voice calm but urgent. "Orion," she called, keeping her tone steady. "We're here to help. You have to trust me." The alpha's amber eyes locked onto hers, his stance both defensive and desperate. Eleanor knelt, holding her hands out in a gesture of peace. She could feel the rangers behind her tense, their hands hovering near their tranquilizer guns. Orion took a step forward, his head low and his ears pinned back. He growled softly, a warning, but there was no malice in his gaze, only fear. Eleanor remained still, her heartbeat steady. "It's okay," she said softly. "We've done this before, remember? Let me help." The alpha hesitated, his muscles quivering with indecision. Then, to everyone's astonishment, he took another step forward, followed by a second. Behind him, the rest of the pack stirred, their trust in their leader outweighing their fear of the humans. Eleanor gestured to the rangers. "Form a path. Move slowly." The group created a corridor, guiding the wolves toward the only safe route out of the fire's reach. Orion led the way, pausing every few steps to glance back at Eleanor, as if ensuring she was still with them. The flames roared closer, and embers danced in the air like fireflies. The pup stumbled, its small legs unable to keep up. Without hesitation, Eleanor scooped it up, cradling it against her chest. The pup whimpered but didn't resist. "Go!" she urged the rangers. "We're almost there." A safe haven. The group emerged from the forest into a cleared area where emergency vehicles waited. The wolves hesitated at the edge of the trees, their instincts warning them against the open space. Eleanor knelt again, setting the pup down gently. "You're safe now," she murmured. Orion stepped forward, his massive frame dwarfing hers. He sniffed the air, then nudged the pup toward the rest of the pack. The wolves gathered around their leader, forming a tight circle. For a moment Orion stood still, his eyes meeting Eleanor's. She felt a profound connection in that gaze, a silent acknowledgement of her role in their survival. Then, with a low growl, he turned and led his pack back into the forest, away from the fire's path. A ripple of change. The wildfire burned for days, but thanks to the sanctuary's efforts, no lives were lost. The rescued animals, including Orion's pack, became symbols of resilience and cooperation. Eleanor's actions during the crisis solidified her reputation as a bridge between humans and wildlife. News outlets picked up the story, calling it a testament to the power of trust. But for Eleanor, the true reward was seeing the animals thrive. Orion's pack continued to visit the sanctuary's outskirts, their presence a reminder of the bond they had formed. Aurora and her cubs, now fully grown, often lounged near the observation deck, as if keeping watch over their human allies. A new era. Years later, Haven's Edge had expanded its reach, sharing its methods with sanctuaries around the world. Eleanor became a sought-after speaker, advocating for coexistence and respect between humans and the natural world. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Eleanor stood at the edge of the forest, reflecting on the journey. A familiar figure emerged from the shadows. Orion, his coat now streaked with silver. Beside him stood a younger wolf, likely his heir. They gazed at Eleanor for a moment, their silhouettes framed by the fading light. Then, without a sound, they vanished into the trees, leaving her with a profound sense of fulfillment. In a world often divided by fear and misunderstanding, Haven's Edge had proven that trust could bridge even the deepest divides. And in that moment, Eleanor truly understood why even predators entrusted humans with their most precious treasures, their cubs, their safety, and their future.